People always ask me when I started believing that cursed objects exist. I don't tell them about ghosts. Or demons. I tell them about my sister's teddy bear. It was just an ordinary stuffed bear. At least, that's what everyone else thought. I still remember the day my sister brought it home. We lived in a small apartment in Russia, in one of those gray Soviet apartment blocks where every hallway looked the same, and every stairwell smelled of old paint and damp concrete. She was only a toddler. I was 4. The bear had soft brown fur and an old-fashioned stitched smile. There was only one problem: its eyes. They didn't look like plastic. They looked real, not shiny like glass. Not painted, real. As if someone had taken the eyes from a living animal and sewn them into a toy. Even as a child, I couldn't explain why they bothered me so much. Whenever I looked into them, I had the strange feeling that something was looking back. We had a dog back then. He chewed everything he could get his teeth on. So my mother started keeping the bear on top of a tall wardrobe in the hallway whenever my sister wasn't playing with it. Every time I walked upstairs after school, I glanced toward that wardrobe. The bear was always sitting in exactly the same place, half hidden behind the corner, watching the hallway, watching me. I'd always tell myself it was just because of the angle, but no matter where I stood, those eyes somehow seemed locked onto mine. It got so bad that I started running past the hallway instead of walking. My parents laughed whenever I mentioned it. It's just a toy. Stop imagining things. Eventually, even I convinced myself they were right. Years passed. My sister outgrew her toys. One afternoon, my mother packed most of them into an old wooden cabinet. The bear disappeared with everything else. There was only one problem. The cabinet ended up in my bedroom. By then, I was 9 years old. Old enough to sleep alone. Old enough to know monsters weren't real. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. Most nights were normal. Sometimes I'd wake up from a nightmare and switch on my desk lamp until I calmed down. One night, after another bad dream, I sat up in bed and looked across the room. The cabinet. I suddenly remembered what was inside. The bear. For a long moment, I just stared at the closed doors. I almost laughed at myself. I was 9 years old. There was no reason to be afraid of a stuffed animal. I turned over, pulled the blanket higher, and tried to go back to sleep. Then, something caught my eye. At the far end of my room, someone was sitting in the darkness. I looked again. The teddy bear, it wasn't inside the cabinet anymore. It was sitting in the corner of my bedroom, facing me. Its eyes reflected the faint light from my desk lamp, and it wasn't smiling anymore. At least, I don't remember it smiling. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. I kept telling myself, someone must have taken it out earlier. Maybe my mother, or maybe my sister. That had to be it. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Eventually, my eyes began to close, just for a second. When I opened them again, the bear was closer. Not much. Maybe a meter closer. But it had definitely moved. That's when I stopped trying to explain it. My heart started pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. I pressed myself against the wall without taking my eyes off it. I squeezed my eyes shut, counted to 5, opened them again. The corner was empty. The bear was gone. I searched every inch of the room. Nothing. I let out a shaky breath. Maybe I had imagined all of it. Maybe I was still half asleep. I slowly lay back down, closed my eyes, and waited for sleep to come. It never did. A few minutes later, I opened my eyes one last time. The bear was leaning over my bed. Its face was only inches from mine. Those eyes were staring directly into mine. My father switched on the ceiling light. My mother rushed over to my bed. What happened? I couldn't answer. I just pointed toward the floor beside my bed. The bear was gone. There was nothing there. My parents searched every corner of the room. They opened the cabinet, looked under the bed, even checked the hallway. Nothing. They assumed I'd had another nightmare. My father laughed it off. You've been watching too many scary movies. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell them I hadn't been dreaming. But even I wasn't completely sure anymore. Had I imagined it? Or had something really been standing over me? The next morning, I walked straight to the cabinet. The bear was back inside, sitting exactly where my mother had left it, facing the doors, watching me. I didn't touch it. I didn't even open the cabinet all the way. I just shut the door again and tried to forget about it. But I never slept peacefully in that room again. Every night before turning off the lights, I'd check the cabinet. Every morning, the bear was still there, exactly where it belonged. Years passed. Nothing happened. Eventually, I convinced myself that whatever I'd seen that night had simply been the imagination of a frightened kid. Then one afternoon, when I was around 13, I took the bear outside. There was an old metal barrel behind our apartment building where people sometimes burned yard waste. I threw the bear inside, covered it with dry branches, and lit a match. I stood there until nothing remained but black ash and twisted metal from the stuffing frame. For the first time in years, I felt relieved. Like I'd finally gotten rid of something that had been watching me my entire childhood. After that, life became normal. High school, friends, college plans. Years passed without a single strange thing happening. Eventually, I stopped thinking about the bear altogether until I turned 19. I had finally saved enough money to rent my own apartment. It wasn't much, just a small one-bedroom flat in an old Soviet apartment block. Peeling wallpaper, a tiny kitchen, old wooden floors that creaked with every step, but it was mine. I spent the entire day carrying boxes upstairs. By evening, I brought in the last one and closed the front door behind me. I remember smiling. It felt like the beginning of a completely new life. One of the last things I unpacked was an old wooden cabinet, the same cabinet that had once stood beside my bed. My mother insisted I take it.
It's still in good condition.
She'd said. I carried it into the hallway and placed it in the corner. For a second, it almost looked exactly the way it had 20 years earlier. I laughed at the thought. Some memories never really leave you. I headed back toward the kitchen to grab my television. That's when I froze. Sitting in the middle of my living room was the teddy bear, untouched, unburned. Its fur looked exactly the same. Its stitched smile hadn't changed. Neither had those eyes. Those horrible, impossible eyes. The ones I'd watched burn into ashes years ago. It was looking straight at me, as if it had been waiting for me to come home. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the bear with both hands, ran outside, and threw it into the nearest dumpster. Then I found the largest concrete brick I could lift and dropped it directly on top of it. I stood there for another minute just to make sure it couldn't somehow fall out. Only then did I finally go back upstairs. For the first time since childhood, I locked every door in my apartment. For the first time since moving in, I actually felt safe. The bear was gone, buried beneath piles of garbage and a concrete brick. I locked my apartment, double-checked the windows. Then I went to bed. Sleep came surprisingly fast. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when something woke me. My room was completely dark. I reached for my phone. Board 03 a.m. At first, I thought one of my neighbors was coming home late. Old apartment buildings make all kinds of noises at night. Pipes expand, elevators groan, doors slam. I closed my eyes again. Then I heard it. A slow, heavy, dragging sound. It came from somewhere inside my apartment. I sat up immediately. The sound stopped. Silence. A few seconds later, every hair on my body stood up. I grabbed my phone and switched on the flashlight. The hallway outside my bedroom was empty. Or at least it looked empty. I slowly walked toward the living room. The apartment felt colder than it had before. The front door was wide open. I knew I'd locked it. I remembered checking it twice. Cold night air drifted inside. Across the wooden floor, a trail of muddy footprints led from the hallway into my kitchen. Not away from it, into it. Someone or something had come inside. My flashlight landed on the knife block. One knife was missing. I stared at the empty slot, trying to convince myself I'd simply forgotten to unpack it. Then I heard it right behind me. Not footsteps, not breathing. Something crawling slowly across the floorboards. I turned. Nothing. The living room was empty. But the sound hadn't stopped. It had simply moved somewhere I couldn't see, behind the couch or underneath it. I wasn't interested in finding out. I ran. I didn't grab my wallet, didn't grab my jacket, didn't even lock the apartment. I just ran down 6 flights of stairs, out into the freezing night, straight to my car. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my keys. The engine finally started. I slammed the car into reverse and sped out of the parking lot. Only after I reached the main road did I look into the rearview mirror. My blood froze. The teddy bear was sitting in the back seat, holding my kitchen knife. Its head was tilted slightly to one side. Those same impossible eyes were staring directly at me. For just a moment, I couldn't look away. It felt as if those eyes were pulling me toward them. Like I was forgetting how to breathe. Then Headlights exploded in front of me. I instinctively jerked the steering wheel. The car skidded across the icy road. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, the windshield was shattered. Smoke drifted from beneath the hood. My chest hurt. Blood ran down my forehead. The back seat was empty. The bear was gone. I stumbled out of the car. The rear of the vehicle looked like someone had attacked it with a knife. Long. Deep scratches covered the trunk. The fuel tank had been punctured. Gasoline slowly dripped onto the frozen pavement. The police later blamed the crash on black ice. They couldn't explain the damage. Neither could I. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to get as far away from that road as possible. About half a mile ahead, I saw the glowing sign of a small roadside hotel. It was the only building still open at that hour. I walked the rest of the way, covered in blood, shaking from the cold. The receptionist looked at me like I'd escaped a disaster. Maybe I had... I paid for a room, locked the door, pushed a chair against it, and collapsed onto the bed. For the first time that night, I finally fell asleep. I don't know how long I slept. It couldn't have been more than a few hours. When I finally opened my eyes, everything felt strangely peaceful. Morning light filtered through the thin hotel curtains. For a moment, I almost convinced myself the nightmare was over. The apartment, the footprints, the crash. Maybe it had all been some kind of concussion. Maybe my mind had filled in the blanks after the accident. I let out a slow breath. Then I looked toward the foot of the bed. The teddy bear was sitting there, perfectly still, exactly in the center. Its legs dangled over the edge of the mattress. Its head was tilted slightly, watching me, waiting. Those eyes hadn't changed in 15 years. They still looked impossibly real, as if there were someone or something looking out through them. I couldn't breathe. I didn't scream. I didn't move because this time I knew I wasn't dreaming. The room was silent. Then the bear slowly raised one paw, just a few inches, like a child waving hello. That was enough. I bolted out of the bed and threw open the hotel room door. I didn't even stop to grab my phone. The receptionist shouted after me as I ran through the lobby barefoot. I never went back for my belongings. I never returned to that hotel. The police recovered my crashed car later that afternoon. They found my wallet, my luggage, everything I had packed for my move. Everything except the teddy bear. They assumed it had been thrown from the vehicle during the crash. I let them believe that. It was easier. A week later, I hired movers to clear out my apartment. I refused to step inside again. One of the movers called me afterward. He said the place was almost empty. Then he laughed. Kind of weird though. There was an old teddy bear sitting in the hallway. I figured it belonged to you, but by the time I went back to grab it, it was gone. I hung up without saying a word. That was 3 years ago. I've lived in 4 different apartments since then. I never keep old furniture. I never unpack boxes the day I move in. And every night, before I go to sleep, I check every room, every closet, every corner. Just in case. People think cursed objects have to follow rules, that you have to touch them, keep them, bring them home. I don't believe that anymore. Because I burned that bear, I buried it. I left it behind. And somehow, it always found me. Sometimes, around 4 in the morning, I wake up for no reason at all. I don't open my eyes immediately because every now and then, I can feel something sitting at the foot of my bed, waiting for me to look. I never do.